My name is Marissa Martin. I am 34 years old and I was born in Incheon, South Korea. I was adopted when I was 6 months old. I grew up in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and I have one brother who is biological to my adoptive parents, and they're Caucasian. When I was 14, I was rooting around my parents' cabinet and I found a brown file that had my Korean name on it, Oh Sun-hee, and it was written in Hangul, and it was clearly not something that was English, and so I obviously opened it and I looked at it. The adoption agency had given it to my parents, and I later learned, just with policies and so forth, I wasn't supposed to get it until I was 18. But at 14, I opened it up and I just saw my whole story. And I saw files from my foster family about how I behaved. I actually just put it back into the file and put it back in the drawer and acted like I never saw it. And I never told my parents, and I actually, to this day, I don't know if they know that I actually saw it. I questioned everything. I questioned my existence. I questioned what I was doing in New Hope, Pennsylvania, which was a totally white area. I had always really thrived, had a ton of friends, loved to be social, and at that time it was really hard to, like, you know, figure out what was what and figure out what was real, figure out why was I, like, existing, right? And I think that that's like a question that you hear from adoptees of all different ages. And so for me, I think at that time it just really hit me hard, because you see that like you're reading in a file that you were given up. The people who I went to after I looked through my file and when I was kind of struggling with this were definitely my adoptee friends who I met at camp. And like to this day, I'm good friends with them, and I still keep in touch with them. I hang out with them, and I've kept up that community. But at the time, it was just like I didn't feel like I could talk to any of my other friends. I had met a lot of folks through the network of adoptees, and I came up with some great opportunities for a scholarship and to go on this amazing tour. And so I went, and you hear so many different stories about people who go to Korea for the first time. Like, they hate it, they love it, they're like there for life, they're never going back. And I loved it. I really did feel great. I didn't feel like I was home. I didn't feel like I was at a place that I totally belonged, but I just really enjoyed the feeling of it. So I decided to stay and teach, and so I stayed for about a year. I was teaching English to young kids, and then until 10 p.m., and then going out and singing and dancing until 4 a.m., and then eating until 6 a.m., and then sleeping, and then repeating. I guess 6 months later, when I decided that I was going to move back to the U.S. because my life was just sort of at a standstill, I sat down with a social worker who happened to be an adoptee, and we happened to know similar people, and just talked to her and, told her my experience in Korea, told her, what I was thinking, and just, if I leave and I never meet my family, that's fine, at least I tried, and, this is sort of the journey that I'm on, and there's no expectations. And she just, in the middle of it, was like, well, would you want to meet your mom? And I was like, yeah, I think it would be cool. And she was just like, well, we have her phone number. I called her, and a few days later, they told me she wanted to meet. And I went back to the agency, and we went out, of course, for Korean barbecue. And it was just very surreal. And there was, there was a translator there from the agency, and she just was crying and sobbing and hitting me really hard on the back, and just, like trying to feed me. And it was just a really strange situation. From that point in 2006 until now, we've probably met six or seven times, and like it all blurs together. She is now married, and she has 2 sons, and they're just a few years younger than me, and they don't know that she ever had another child. Her husband doesn't know she has another child, and that took a long time to like be okay with, and to meet her and almost like have an affair. Like, we would be out and her children would call. And I would hear her, my Korean is not good, but I would hear, my, like, oh, I'm in Seoul with a friend, right? Like, I'm, and I'm like, I'm not a friend. And so, yeah, it was a really tough time. There were times where I didn't want to speak to her at all. We cacao talk for a while and stuff, but it definitely took a long time to get to like a good point. For a lot of adoptees, it's like you've spent a long time of your life where everything in your life was not your choice. And you just had to deal with it, and you had to make the best of it. And if you didn't make the best of it, then, you were kicked out or people ostracized you. And so you just wanted someone to listen, and it's really hard to find people who understand that it's like part of this is treating your mental health is like listening. I volunteered for camps for probably like 6 to 7 years. And I feel like every single year that I did it 3 different places in New Jersey, Nebraska, and on the West Coast. I feel like after every single year, you would hear about somebody who killed themselves. These camps are an amazing thing because you're going to these places and giving these kids a community that they don't have, but it's a horrible thing because then you leave. And you have parents that don't understand it and that get really angry about it, right? Like my parents, the first time I came home and I was just like, wow, it's so weird to be around these white people. My parents were like aghast. And their first reaction was like, where are we sending our daughter where she feels like she can come home and then just call us white people? I think still whenever I'm talking about like race and I'm talking about the work that I'm doing and people of color, like they're very still sort of like cringe because I am creating this divide in the sense of like, I am not like you. People don't see me like you. And I've stayed involved in the adoptee community for so long because for me, those are the people who like kept me on track, right? It wasn't my parents, it wasn't my therapist, it was like my friends. My name is Marissa Martin, and this is my Korean American story.